Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Alex Goss, and I'll be your host for today's Community Roundtable. We are in a antitrust policy environment, so we'll all be mindful of keeping any of our confidential information, and so we don't violate any of those rules. Without further ado, let me move on to some of an overview and welcome housekeeping activities. Today's presentations will first, kick off with a silver lining of 2020, the Community Roundtable and Industry Engagement. Jocelyn and I will be giving you an overview of the successful 8 months of roundtables that we've had. And that will lead us into an exciting presentation from Humana, Achieving Integrated Care Delivery Using FHIR. Why, how, and yes, it's a big deal. We have a tremendous lineup of speakers from Humana, and that will be the primary agenda for topic for today. To help us get into the flow of things, let me first take care of a few housekeeping items. This will be the last roundtable of 2020. We will resume on the fourth Wednesday of January 2021. You can check out our Da Vinci calendar, which also contains recordings of these events as a subpage. We also have an HL7 events page that you might want to be aware of, and especially if you're interested in participating in the virtual FHIR Connectathon 26, January 13th through 15th. Registration is now available and early bird ends December 30th. All of you are in listen-only mode to help us with quality of our recording. We appreciate your flexibility in using the questions panel to submit your questions. It's a little arrow on the GoToWebinar as shown on the screen. We will take Q&A after each presentation, and if you're having any audio issues, we really suggest that you consider using the dial-in information in your registration link. We appreciate the survey feedback we've received to date, and we'll have another survey at today's completion of our webinar. So please help us and give us your thoughts and feedback as we do apply them in continuing to improve our overall roundtables, and we'll continue to bring those to you in 2021. At this point, I'd like to welcome Jocelyn Keegan to assist me in discussing the silver lining of 2020. It's been a tough year, but the Community Roundtable and the level of industry engagement has really been fantastic, and for us, a big bright spot this year. So Jocelyn, please.
Awesome, thanks, Alex. So I sound okay?
You do.
Awesome, thank you. So first, I'd like to bring us back in time to March of 2020. And what was happening. We were perched really at the verge of a number of deployments going live and early demonstrations coming out of the Da Vinci community. Had geared up for a pretty bold and advanced presentation at HIMSS 20. I affectionately refer to March as either 8,000 days ago or 8 minutes ago, depending on the moment. And I'm sure everyone on the call can appreciate that. But what we were able to do as the world really tumbled towards COVID and we started to make hard decisions about what we were doing as a society, let alone our work lives, is we as a PMO team really started to look at what we were going to be able to do to support this growing community and this emerging community. You know, we saw literally up to a day and a half before, people were getting on planes to go to HIMSS, it canceling. We got the gift the first day of what would have been HIMSS 20, additional rules from our friends on the federal side and final rules in May. And in amongst that, what we saw was, I would say, a group of organizations that were able to protect and ring fence their early work on both the work around the regulatory environment, but also progressing forward what was happening in the Da Vinci community to move forward interoperability between payers and providers. And we often say, as we're talking about sort of the impact of COVID on Da Vinci, that really the work itself that we're doing becomes a prime example of sort of the opportunity that we have to solve a lot of the problems that we've seen in the community around being able to get patient information as portable as we need it to be for care providers, during this crazy year that we've all been dealing with. And we saw, I would say, a consistent support of moving forward and doubling down in a lot of ways on the efforts that we were trying to do. And so as a PMO team, we were brainstorming sort of what were the tools that were available to us. We had already pivoted to create more public forums for ourselves in late 2019 and into 2020, and had introduced this concept of community roundtable. So the week of HIMSS, of what would have been HIMSS, we actually pivoted, I would say probably about 70% of the content that we had created, that we planned to do on the floor of the exhibit hall, and were able to deliver it virtually, but still had a bolus of information. And so starting really in those weeks coming out of HIMSS, we started to schedule formal member forums and community roundtables to start to reach people sort of in the world that we were in, right? This virtual world that we were moving to. And that this idea and this concept of creating, I like to refer to it as Alex putting a conference in a box on every single month, to allow the members from Da Vinci to be able to come and talk to folks about what was happening for real, what they were learning, and using both Community Roundtable and our more intimate member forum each month to be able to do that. So starting in March, we were able to get our first community roundtable up and running, and really have used it throughout the year as a showcase to be able to foster this learning environment and to really show people that we were using these tools to make interoperability reality. Alex, can you flip forward a slide for me? This is we had a joint steering and operating committee meeting virtually 2 weeks ago as part of our member meetings for this quarter, and I went through and expanded a slide that we had created back in the very early days of Da Vinci, and I won't belabor what's on here, but I think if folks can understand sort of the community aspect of what we're building here, that every one of the use cases that we're going to talk about, and Patrick's team will highlight that they've been working on throughout the year, and that we've had at our other show and tells over the course of this year, and storytelling events over the course of this year, is just that each one of these sort of topic areas has its own community, and that we continue to see not just an increase in membership of people that are paying or funding and committing to Da Vinci, but the growing community of implementers out in the market has been striking, and we continue to experiment and learn and put on events to basically grow the community itself and make it easy for people that are new to FHIR or new to Da Vinci to be able to come and pick up the tools that we're using and learn from others as we move along. So I'm going to just clear one more slide today to talk a little bit about just where we are status-wise. And our goal here really is this concept of how mature are these guides that are being built? Because if we think about the core work that we're doing here with the program, is how do we build the recipe for specific business problems for people to be able to pick up these implementation guides and use them and reuse them with multiple business partners. So if you take a glance over the fall and into the end of this year, we'll really be moving the vast majority of our implementation guides to a published state, either a draft standard for trial use 1 or 2, but more importantly, we're starting to see more and more footprint of people picking up the guides and using them and getting feedback into the development cycle of the implementation guides themselves. One quick note that I would make here is we're actually kicking off and doing discovery work within the membership right now on 2 new use cases: price cost transparency and risk-based coding. We're expecting that we'll likely bring those use cases live to the public for those who aren't Da Vinci members coming out of work group in January. So really starting those public meetings the end of January, beginning of February. As folks can see, we're adding to our list of Da Vinci implementation guides that can be used to support some of the regulations coming out of CMS and ONC. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Alex, and she's going to talk to you about what we were able to show and give you guys the highlight reel from this year's Community Roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn. This has been a terrific response. The community has very much delivered in the last 8 months for bringing forward their lessons learned to the community. We've educated 1,700 colleagues through direct and indirect or offline learning opportunities, thanks to 35 individuals who've represented 18 member organizations and 7 partners, technology partners, who brought together some very fascinating presentations, and I'll dive a little bit more into what they talked about in a moment. But these presentations were in addition to 3 programmatic updates that we also delivered. So the result being that we had a variety of demonstrations and showing that the implementation guides that Jocelyn just showcased us on the last slide are working. They're bringing value and showing that standards and the possibility that they bring can actually make a difference. The presenters have shared their hard-learned lessons and challenges and the things that were reproducible and leverageable as they move forward, as we probably have all learned along the way. Once you implement FHIR, you can keep building on that success. And we're most appreciative of all the fostering of the community that our presenters have brought since we launched in March 2020. For a little bit deeper dive into the topics, let's first showcase that there were 4 out of our 5 focus areas where implementation guides were discussed. This included quality improvement, burden reduction, member access, and clinical data exchange. It's really amazing to see that within those 4 focus areas, 9 implementation guides were discussed with 15 implementation projects demonstrated and reviewed to bring to the outside world the internal experience. In addition to these implementation projects that were showcased, we had a strong degree of federal collaboration. Our CMS partners introduced the Patient Access API. Our ONC team for FHIR at Scale Task Force talked to us about national scalability of FHIR and what it was going to take, since they're working on addressing the problems that no FHIR accelerators or standards body can solve on their own. And then we saw from the trenches of CMS their work for the documents requirements lookup service to really leverage 2 of our implementation guides. Although the implementation guides that were showcased are listed here, I want to take a little bit deeper dive on the next slide to give you a sense of a couple things. One, if you missed a session, don't worry. You can learn from the recordings, just like we're recording today's session. We do have the recordings posted on the Da Vinci homepage, which is publicly available. You can link to it from the homepage and dive into the video presentation subspace. For the overall implementation demonstrations, this table really gives you a summary view of which implementation guides were talked about in which months by which presenting members. And although their partners aren't listed on here, you do have a really good sense of just how widely a number of our implementation guides are being deployed, with data exchange demonstrated 4 times, all the way down to prior authorization also being demonstrated. Standards are just the start, and that's one of the values of having this community roundtable. The standards must be brought to life through the implementation projects, which involve cross-functional teams that need to be formed that really address operational workflows, integrating new technologies, creating new methods of communication and cultural expectations for how information can be exchanged and automated within the workflow processes, and ultimately bringing value to all of those participants within the demonstration projects, and hopefully to be experienced in a broader production environment as a number of the demonstrators are actually completed their proof of concepts and are moving their implementation efforts into a production status in 2021. Ultimately bringing the value to the care outcomes, the experience in the healthcare system, the cost and allocation of resources, while also maintaining trust and visibility into the data information exchange. I'm at this point of giving you an overview of the successful 8 roundtables that we've had. We weren't necessarily anticipating that there would be questions on this. We really wanted to showcase for you all the content that our membership and their partners have brought to bear, and that we are looking forward to really having 2021 be the solid year of implementation. I think COVID threw a little bit of all of us off our schedule this year, along with a number of rules that have dropped, but it is an exciting time, and 2021 is going to bring us even more implementation projects to bring to you here. So Jocelyn, I'm not seeing any questions, are you?
You know, I think we're good unless folks want to drop questions in. We'll give us more time to preserve at the end. And I would like to give thank you to everybody that not only presented here, but presented in one of the other, 50 or 60 places we gave Da Vinci updates or demonstrations this past year. It's been amazing, and it's been impressive to watch all of you continue to move forward in spite of all of the business challenges and just life challenges we've had this year. And I'm super excited to hear from the Humana team. So I'll let you hand it off.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's amazing how much a labor of love this work is for participants in the Da Vinci and the FHIR community. They do a lot of this work off the side of their desk in addition to their daytime responsibilities, and Humana is an exemplar of their ability to really contribute to the industry, to be thought leaders, and to really advance the FHIR opportunity for improving the overall experience. And so I'm super excited to introduce Patrick Murtaugh. He and I collaborate in a number of spaces and places, and I am really excited for he to introduce your team and for us to hear all about the Humana project. So I will be advancing your slides.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Jocelyn. And thanks to all the Da Vinci community. We're glad to be here today. So again, I'm Patrick Murtaugh. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce the Humana team that's going to be helping me present today. So first, we got Lisa Stevens, who's our Senior Vice President for Clinical Operations. Mike Funk, who's Vice President for Office of Health Affairs and Advocacy. Todd Soderquist, our Vice President in our Healthcare Services Technology area. Brian Thomas, who is our Director of Interoperability Product Management. Sonia Boyes, who's our Product Manager for Rapid FHIR. Jeff Kinnison, who's our Principal in Enterprise Interoperability. And last but certainly not least, Phil Britt, who is our Director, he's kind of a directory too, but a Director in Technology Solution Implementation. All right, so let's get started. Alex, if you could go to the next slide, please. And we've got quite a bit of material here today. So we've got quite a few slides. And the reason for that is some of the material is going to stay fairly high level. So we're going to do a refresher on FHIR and APIs in general. But also we're going to go a little bit more in depth on certain key things. And we wanted folks to have more information so that when you go back to your desk, if you have questions, comments, or need additional stuff, you have some reference material to go through. We also appreciate that we've probably got a fairly wide audience today, as those that some are very familiar with Da Vinci. That you've been with us since day one. But we also recognize that there may be some folks today who this may be their first Da Vinci meeting as well. So our goal over the first series of slides, or the first couple of slides, is to kind of set the stage of what we're doing from an interoperability perspective, and then gradually build upon that. So with that being said, again, we're going to start off with a perspective on why interoperability is important to Humana as an organization and to the entire healthcare ecosystem in general. We're going to do a quick review on healthcare interoperability, talk a little bit about APIs, just to set a baseline, talk about FHIR in just a couple of slides, and also then dive into Humana's perspective and our approach to implement interoperability to better serve our members and providers. And then, of course, we'll have some discussion, question and answer towards the end. So, Alex, if you could go to the next slide, please. To kind of set perspective, and again, we appreciate that everybody on the call here probably has a great understanding of healthcare and some of the challenges that we have for interoperability, but we like to set the stage because we can certainly represent the gaps as it relates to the human factor, the folks that when people go to their doctor that may not always have a complete history, labs have to be repeated, there's repeated testing, it's just not a great experience. But last year, Humana, partnering with the University of Pittsburgh, did a study to try to quantify that, I should say. And as you can see on the screen here, there's quite a bit of waste in healthcare, almost $1 trillion. And what I think is even more interesting for the folks, and including the Da Vinci community, is that if you look at the bottom, 25% of that, or $191 billion to $282 billion, is directly attributable to lack of cohesive interoperability. So again, the human factor, and also the financial factor, a lot of abrasions that interoperability will help us remove. All right, Alex, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Okay, so just kind of setting the stage from an interoperability perspective. And as Alex noted, the very creative title to this presentation is Achieving Integrated Care Delivery with FHIR. And this very simple diagram that we have on the right side is meant to represent that, in the sense that we've got members, we've got patients, we've got clinicians, we've got health plans, and our goal is to use interoperability to bring those together so that we have the right data at the right time in the right encounter with the right clinician for the best outcome, right? And we're gonna have several examples of how we're approaching that today, but our goal really is to achieve this integrated care delivery model. And FHIR and interoperability is a mechanism or a lever for us to help achieve that. Now, I know that folks on the call probably understand what interoperability is, but just to make sure that we're communicating clearly, interoperability is distinguished from just data exchange, because everybody's been doing data exchange for many, many years. Interoperability is predicated on repeatable, standards-based, in workflow integration in a coordinated fashion, right? So build once, reuse as much as you can. So that's the difference between how we're looking at interoperability and the enablers that it brings compared to our previous way of doing data exchange across the healthcare ecosystem. Next slide, please. And although this is a very, very simple slide, it's one of my favorites. I call it the crayon picture, and it basically represents at a really high level, what exchange looks like. And if you look at the vehicles on the left side, you got a school bus, you got a motor scooter, a Tesla, it looks like, in a car. And those are functional use cases, data that have to go from the clinic on the right, the clinic on the left to the health plan on the right. And that works at small scale, right? Because the data is going back and forth. The problem with this model is it doesn't scale because the roadways are rebuilt every time a connection is made. The model on the right, using FHIR and using interoperability at scale, provides a much more seamless approach, and that we've agreed upon, the roadway. We've got a nice roadway there with lines in the middle. We've got a light to guide traffic. The same vehicle, the same functional use cases for the most part, but we're able to do it in an integrated fashion across this little city, which is basically an analogy for the healthcare ecosystem. Next slide, please. All right, and one of the themes that we're going to hit on during our presentation today is simple and easy experiences. And I know that sounds probably a little bit cliche, but one of the things that we've learned is that we can benefit from work that's been done in other industry. And those of you who have heard me talk before know that I like to pull up my phone and talk about what we do from an e-commerce perspective, in the sense that if we do shopping on one of the e-commerce sites, it's a completely API-enabled experience. So you can basically get whatever you do. For me, it's buying socks, 30 seconds, color, size, buy. That's all enabled by APIs on the back end, right? APIs to the bank to make sure the money's there, APIs to the warehouse to make sure the stocks or the socks are in stock, and the API to the shipping company to make sure they can get it to me in 2 days. Compare that to prior authorization. In fact, Lisa and Todd in just a few slides are going to walk through some of the approaches that we're taking based upon the Da Vinci implementation guides to try to make that model more like what we see in other industries, going from almost a 17 to 18-minute experience down to about 2 or 3 minutes. So again, our goal is to use this modern contemporary interoperability to bring simple and easy experiences to our stakeholders, our providers, our members, and our patients. Right data, right place, right time, right outcome. Next slide, please. Okay, and just really quickly, because especially if you're new to Da Vinci, let's frame up where we consider today's discussion to be. Because if you've been in healthcare for any length of time, you know that there are several domains as it relates to integration or sharing of information. We've got the classic world of HIPAA transactions, X12 with claim submission, prior authorization, eligibility and benefits, claim status, the list can go on and on. We've got the classic world of clinical interoperability, which we've all lived through with HL7 version 2 and also version 3 with CCDs and similar documents. And now we have the brave new world of contemporary interoperability, where we're using FHIR and adjacent or complementary approaches, such as CDS hooks, to bring a whole new experience to healthcare. And that's what we want to focus on today. But I don't want to leave this slide without, bringing, kind of an obvious point here, is that these models are coming together, right? So the ability to do insights based upon classic administrative data and also new FHIR and HL7, older HL7 data is quite powerful, right? Bringing that information together. And also the fact that from an analytical perspective, regardless of where the data comes from, it can be represented in a contemporary information model. And we're going to talk about a few examples of that in a few minutes here. So I want to make sure that folks understand the convergence, although we're talking about FHIR and those technologies today, the convergence of these different types of integration models will be more prevalent as we go over the next couple of years. And just maybe one quick example, and I want people to think about this during the presentation. For those of you that are familiar with the 270 and a 271 transaction and eligibility and benefits in the classic HIPAA world, and in the brave new world of FHIR, doing a patient search or a patient match operation on a payer, right? Because those are the types of things we're starting to look at from a Humana perspective, you know, the classic HIPAA world and the brave new world of contemporary interoperability. Next slide, please. Just really quickly on this slide, and you know, I use this kind of for dramatic purposes in the sense that this is a very, very simple slide. It talks about the provider as the quarterback. It talks about the consumer as the, you know, basically being the steward of their data in their healthcare. And it talks about the health plan having a lot of information that's very pertinent to the ecosystem and bringing that all together. But this slide, or this representation, was unthinkable probably 10 years ago. We just didn't have the technology. We didn't have the industry consortiums. We didn't have the HL7 accelerators, such as Da Vinci and the others, to bring this type of thing together, right? So the collaboration and basically helping providers, health plans, and consumers understand and you know, buy into the fact that they're key active interoperability stakeholders. Next slide, please. All right, so just really, really quickly, again, this is maybe for the newer folks too, from a Da Vinci perspective. APIs, what are APIs? And for the purpose of today's discussion, an API is nothing more than a piece of software that basically allows two servers, two apps, two entities to share information. The best example is your phone, right? When you're doing e-commerce or whatever, all of those transactions are API enabled, or open table. Pick your favorite tool, your favorite web app. That's all driven by the API economy. FHIR is an API model and also an information model for healthcare, so that as an industry, we've agreed what the API model looks like, what the information model looks like, so that when we start going to exchange information, we don't have to renegotiate with everybody that we're exchanging information with. We all agree to the standards, we agree to the protocols, and it's simply a matter of connecting from one FHIR implementation for another. And you see around the right on the right side that FHIR is kind of the hinge, or the protocol that enables the connectivity along all of those entities or actors that you see in the outside circle. Next slide, please. Okay, what is FHIR and why is it different? And I realize that's probably a very obvious thing, but I want to make sure that we hone in on this, because as we're going through some of the prior authorization and some of the stuff that Sonia is going to talk about from a document template and rules perspective, understand that this contemporary technology allows us to do things that we couldn't do in previous technologies, right? I'm not saying they're bad. They do exactly what they were meant to do. The clinical domain does exactly what it was supposed to do with V2. The X12 world does exactly what it was supposed to do from an administrative integration perspective. But the things that we're able to do is actually bring payer information into a provider workflow and get provider information and bring it back to a payer and put it on apps for consumers and integrate folks such as population health and the CDC and others is really a key component. Again, it is bringing new models or new enablers, as I like to call them, to healthcare that we've all been dreaming about for many, many years. That's the what, and that's the why. Next slide, please. And then I promise I'm not going to have any more of these circles on any slides going forward, but I just want to hit one more key component. We all understand that FHIR provides technical connectivity. You see all of the happy people on the left side joined together with a FHIR framework, but it also provides a mechanism for community connectivity. And the fact that since we have an agreed upon technology, we can come together with our HR7 accelerators and other groups to agree on use cases by domain. So in the Da Vinci Project, it's always obviously value-based care. So our use cases are predicated on improving value-based care using a common technology. But there's many others. For example, Codex with oncology, Karen with consumer mediation, the Argonaut Project with core data services, the Gravity Project with social determinants of health, and many, many others. We seem to get new HL7 accelerators almost every week in the HL7 space. But it's quite remarkable that we have a technology that brings us together, and then we've created a community around things that we can solve collectively while we all maintain our own entity and culture as different organizations and models that we do business. It brings together ability to share information, share insights, share interoperability across a common platform with common common use cases and common consortia. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so why FHIR now? So hopefully at this point in the presentation, you're not really asking this question, but in case you still are, let's talk about a few things. I'm just going to go this really quickly. FHIR enables the HL7 accelerators that we've talked about, and the HL7 accelerators are bringing us together as an industry. We've talked about the fact that we need integrated care delivery, and FHIR is a technology that brings integrated care delivery in a way that we couldn't get before. Value-based care, we've already talked about that. The CMS and ONC initiatives that Alex and Jocelyn have mentioned a couple times during their preamble, in which those of us on the Humana team and also in healthcare in general have been advocating for using FHIR for many use cases for many years, and the fact that CMS has brought that forward as a regulation is basically changing the landscape of how we do interoperability. So the fact, we call it an inflection point: right technology, right use cases, government support, and industry consortia. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have got the foundational components out of the way. I'm looking at my clock in record time. I don't think I've ever given the presentation that quickly. So I don't know if it's the caffeine or I'm just getting better at it, not sure, but we're gonna go ahead and continue. So what we wanna do is basically present Humana's approach to interoperability, right? So we're gonna spend a little time, both because we wanna make sure that the industry understands that Humana is serious and dedicated and committed to using interoperability to move the ball forward for our constituents. We also want to let folks understand that as a leader in this space, there are things that you can look at and things that you can bounce off your own organizations and understand what we've done, the successes that we've had, and also some of the lessons that we've learned, which we're going to go through in a few slides as well. So a couple of the key things that that we use from an enterprise perspective is, first of all, evangelization. Right. And when I first started saying that word a couple of years ago, I know it sounded kind of weird, but the fact that the technology that we have from a FHIR perspective enables certain business and operational things that need to be surfaced throughout the organization. Right. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different paradigm than what we typically have had in healthcare before. And I like to phrase it as, in the old days, we typically waited for somebody, from a business person to come to an IT person and say, I need you to build me a widget, right? And it needs to be 2 inches by 6 inches or whatever the case may be. In the brave new world of FHIR interoperability, product mindset, scaled agile, that model doesn't work well because the enablers come up. So it's more of a team partnership across the industry with the surfacing of those capabilities. So folks like, Jeff, Todd, and Lisa can factor that into their process, their business thinking, their operational thinking. How can we bend the curve? How can we do things better based upon what the technology provides? It's almost, I don't want to say it's an inverse, but it's a different way of thinking. And Brian's going to cover some of that in just a few slides. Recognize that interoperability is a strategic organizational asset, right? And the reason I put that out there is for those organizations that consider FHIR and interoperability to only be a technical thing, a must-do, a regulatory compliance thing, you're missing out. Because if you're only satisfying the floor, then you're not moving the ball forward from an operational or business perspective. Appreciate that there are business and operational enablers that this technology, that these value-based or these HL7 accelerators provide. The third key thing is discover, prototype, test, learn, and iterate, right? Which for many large organizations, ours included, that was something we had to learn to do, right? Because we are a large organization, as many of you on the call are, and the fact that we had a very dogmatic, and it's probably not the right word, but you get the point, of developing software in the past needed to change. And I won't say that's only because of FHIR, but it came together at the same time for a good benefit. And the ability that you have to be able to turn things quickly. You've got to be able to discover things. You've got to be able to surface things to business folks so that they can think through this and figure out how it's going to change processes. That's the way you actually move the ball forward. Again, in the next item there is a product-focused agile mindset, creating standard-based enablers, which align to ecosystem value. Again, we're not out just to build APIs because they're cool. I mean, they really are, but the fact they actually have to tie in with, key use cases for the organization, they have to deliver value. They should be standards based, right? That's just the world that we live in from a healthcare perspective. Prioritization and sequence of deliverables were for optimal time-bound value. That's quite a mouthful there. But that basically means as things are coming into prioritization process, you've got to make decisions in this product-focused, agile world of what can you deliver in what time frame for the most value for your patients, your members, your providers, your partners, right? And that's an exercise that we go through quite frequently from a Humana perspective. Coordinate at an enterprise level. Jeff's going to talk a little bit about this in a few slides, in the sense that if your organization is medium or large, this needs to be an enterprise initiative. If you approach it from a departmental level or other, even lower than that, then you're missing some key enablers across your organization. So Jeff's going to walk through how we approach that from a business perspective and an IT and an operational perspective. And then also I'm going to fold in some of the technical stuff in the sense that from our perspective, we consider interoperability to be a platform, not just an application. And I'm going to walk through that. Some of you might be shaking your head, what's he talking about, a platform? But the fact that this is a platform that does FHIR, but it does a lot of other things as well, right? So it is something that the enterprise can use to as it's not central, but it's a unified interoperability model that folks across the organization, when they're coming up with use cases, can use this to surface it, be the consumer journey, the provider journey, whatever the case may be. So don't build a model in which it's so constricted or so constrained that it only solves one use case. Platforms enable you to solve current use cases and also build for the future. We call it future proofing. Next slide, please. Okay, some of the guiding principles to inform our interoperability strategy. All in for consumer data sharing, right? It's here. CMS rule goes into effect. 7.1 will be enforced on 7.1 next year. The fact that there's going to be a plethora of third-party apps, consumers are going to be, basically in charge of their data. So the fact that we are liberating and democratizing our data to meet that goal, and also not just to meet the mandate, but to basically move healthcare forward and right data, right place, right workflow for the right outcome. Open standards-based architecture, that basically means we're using FHIR, implementation guides from Vinci and other organizations, CDS hooks, things that are not specific to any one organization, but those that we can all share as the healthcare community, right? Doesn't mean we can't compete on data and insights and other things that we can differentiate ourselves on, but not competing on things such as file formats and interface contracts and those types of things. Thought leadership and commitment to leading standards. So our organization is involved, in a lot of different organizations, including Da Vinci, CARE, NCA, QHWD, the list could go on. So don't be offended if I didn't mention your specific organization, but the fact that, helping lead this and move forward from a payer perspective, in partnership with the EHRs, in partnership with CMS and ONC, in partnership with providers is something that we have heavily invested in, from our CEO all the way down to the folks that are coding on a day-to-day basis. Interoperability powered by platforms. You can't get away from platforms, folks. So you're going to hear me talk about it a couple of times today. And that basically means that a platform is not an application built for purpose. It's a platform that enables changes and flexibility and reuse of things and built-in components, things that enable current use cases, and those of the future. Next slide, please. All right, at this point, I'm going to call on, or actually I got one more slide here, Humana's interoperability journey. And this is very interesting because Humana as an organization has been doing interoperability or integration for many, many years, going all the way back to, for those of us that have been around for a while, remember before, we had HIPAA, what exchange of information looks like. You think we've got it bad now, man, it was really bad back then in the sense that there were no formats. So, when we first started the HIPAA implementation and, building Availity with Florida Blue and basically providing the foundation, although it was a 2-generation-old technology at this point, was basically providing the foundation for the administrative world of interoperability. And some of the stuff that, Lisa and Todd are going to talk about from a prior authorization perspective, that's where the 278 and the prior auth came into being many, many years ago. So that technology was, kind of the first out of the gate. The member summary that you see on there is going to come back when we talk about PDEX, because converting our classic Humana member summary to a PDEX implementation has been quite interesting. And I do remember also providing feedback to AHIP, many years ago in response to the health IT initiative, and that really started us down the FHIR journey. Then going into 2015, 2018, starting to do, for example, the first blue button, 1.0, not 2.0, 1.0, in which we basically had on our website in which people could download PDFs and other types of files and that type of thing. We did the CMS blue button 2.0 in 2018. We started on the FHIR journey around 2014 and 2015. And yes, we still have a FHIR version 1 API in production that's in use. It was our first FHIR API, and it's still in production and being used. And then again, going to the right, the adoption and scaling that we're going through, with Da Vinci, the CMS and ONC rules, those types of things. So the key component here is that from our perspective, it's been a journey. Interoperability has been part of our DNA for many, many years. So the work that we're talking about today is the current version of this, and it will go on for many, many years. Next slide, please. Okay, so at this point, I've talked about the fact, a little bit about FHIR, kind of set the stage from a Humana perspective. I'd like to kick it over to Brian Thomas, who's on the call here, to talk about the fact that as we started doing FHIR, we're also shifting as an organization from a waterfall approach to more of a scaled agile product approach. Brian?
Yes, thank you, Patrick. And I know you'll hear a lot about the what and the why today, but a huge piece of this is how it actually gets done. With most of our teams, where the three key components of that are product, planning, and people. Sticking to number one, just product, having a product lifecycle and a product vision for anything that we work on, whether it be platforms, like you'll hear Patrick say it multiple times today, from our interoperability platforms, our capabilities that we build, all the way to data, and viewing data as a product, really productizing it to our end consumers. So within Humana, we have designated teams in alignment to that. So really at its core, everything is treated through a product lens. The next step is planning, and as he's talked about it a few times, just the true nature of being able to be cross-functional is a huge component of this. So cross-functional coordination with each of our layers, no matter what product we're working on. We pull people from across the enterprise depending on the value that they provide to that product and what they could assist with. So to be able to do that, we do multiple big room plannings and do some very large room planning sessions based on scaled agile. So not only are we acting in an agile manner with our teams, because you have to, with a lot of how new information comes out with COVID, with the environment that we live in today, and then just with data in itself, it moves very quickly. So foundationally, our teams work in an agile manner, but now we have to be able to work all together. So we have multiple teams working together, and that's where we take it to stay for scaled agile. So that allows all of our teams to work independently, be empowered to make decisions, but then come together and go to the same strategy and same vision. So those are two huge components. Number three, and it's not the last by any means, is people and the culture of those people. So not only do we look at the end users and our customers based on what products we build, but also how we structure our teams and how we work together is how are we treating those on our team? How are they able to work through problems that they have? Are they empowered to make decisions and to be able to really drive that product forward? Because that the teams are the ones that usually know the most information. I'll tell you, my teams know way more information than I do, but I lean on them to bring that to me so I can help, really help them advance that or push them, a little bit further. And number three, there's just servant leadership. Myself, Patrick, Jeff, I'm sure Lisa and Todd and others within Humana, a lot of those really come into it to where we listen to our employees, our teams, and those we work with, get that information from them and really help them, solve that problem or push them to the next level. But really from a servant leadership perspective, rather than a top down, this is what we're doing, because you don't get the output that you're looking for in that world. So If you don't mind going to the next slide. All right, and so I'm going to double click just a little bit into the user and how we focus there. So specifically with our products, everything that we do, whether it be the platforms, working with developers, engineers, architects, or the data that we're working with, there's 3 components through that. So number 1 is just research. Let's make sure we understand who those users are, who's the customer base we're actually catering to with this platform or data product that we're building. There's a lot of prototype or proto personas that we create to make it a little bit more real with those that are developing on it. We bring those into multiple workshops to then strategize and figure out what are those problems those customers are essentially having, the end users are having, and how can we ideate new ways to work through things with them. So we get a little bit more concrete on the user personas in those workshops. Really lay out the features that we're going to be building and or experimenting with, depending on the problem that we're trying to solve. And then we get the feedback from that as well. So there's a lot of prototyping that even in those workshops where we'll create a mock prototype for that group and be able to walk through it, talk through it, and get that real-time feedback so we can iterate on that as early as possible. And then we do the same thing once we actually design it and get some wireframes out to actual user interviews in the field. So a lot of that, making sure you have that feedback loop all through that and iterating. When you're doing it at a micro level like that, also, it allows you to fail quicker, realize what may have worked, what may not have worked, and recover from that to move on. So we've been working in this model for a few years now in various pockets within Humana and leading, the interoperability space of this as well. In hand with Agile at Humana and some big movements across Humana to really think from a human-centered design approach, a product and Agile mindset, and to make sure that we can truly, in its nature, interoperability is being able to really look across the company and come together and share data and all, leverage the same standard-based data. So you have to have that view of cross-functional collaboration and trust across the enterprise, which is very hard in a large enterprise, I'll tell you that. And I'm not saying by any means we're perfect in that view. We're learning and iterating on that as well. But we're making good progress in that space as well. So that's all I had. If I'm going to give it back to Patrick.
Thank you, Brian. And Alice, if you go to the next slide, we'll just go really, really quickly on here. And one of the things that Brian mentioned, and I talked about just a little bit ago, is the fact that to get ahead, to actually prove the value early, we had to introduce a different concept, because we initially tried to do it with our standard development teams, folks that had deliverables on their schedule and that type of thing. And what we did is we extracted a small group of folks called Rapid Fire. It's both a concept and a team, so that they could be focused on taking, for example, Da Vinci use cases and turning those into Connectathon implementations, turning those into prototypes that we could show folks like Lisa and Todd, hey, this is how we can do prior authorization. And in just a second, Sonia's going to walk through those that basically went through the cycle of an early Humana prototype, went through Connectathon, went through EHR testing, and is going into production as a DTR app. Actually, it's in UAT now, so I think on December 8th, it actually goes live. So with that being said, if we could go ahead and go to the next slide. And we're going to quickly talk about the fact that we've mentioned the enterprise many times during the presentation here. And tying that information together across business, IT, operations, and analytics, and prioritizing it, and making sure that we're actually providing value, because FHIR APIs are cool, but they're much more cool if they add value. So Jeff, could you quickly walk through this?
Yep, thanks, Patrick. As you said, the technology offers a lot of promise, but if you can't wrap it in context and tie it to the experience that we're delivering for our members, it's kind of lost. So what we've done is we've organized really looking at the experience from the consumer journey angle, as well as from the provider workflow. What is it that each group experiences, and how can this technology and really interoperability as a whole add value? So within the context of those, the consumer journey as well as provider workflow, and these are very rough representations of each, we've created 7 value streams, and we have people within the organization that are on point as directly responsible individuals for each of these value streams, of which Todd is one of those. So underneath each value stream, looking at the experiences that we want to create and the kind of value that we want to deliver, we have our use cases organized by these value streams. So that's what brings it all together and really helps involve business leaders throughout the enterprise and throughout the organization, engage them in a way of, what problems can we solve today that we couldn't solve yesterday, and really what value can we deliver tomorrow that we couldn't even imagine before.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Great overview. If we could go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And I think everybody on the call here is familiar with the CMS and ONC rules. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about our implementation and then start relating that to some of the work that we're doing from a platform perspective and how these APIs are built, not specifically, of course, for the CMS and ONC rule, but for interoperability in general and can be used across the board. So Alex, if you could go to the next slide. Just a quick, overview of, from a CMS Blue Button 2.0 perspective, going back to 2018, when, the CMS released the Blue Button API, Humana took that to heart and started basically working on use cases that we could use for our members to approach it from a couple of perspectives. Given the fact that we had, pharmacy data and other types of claim information, one is let's help our members understand what their information, if they're going from traditional Medicare to Medicare Advantage, what their formulary would look like on Humana. What's their cost going to be, right? Because we've got their information from their claims history, and we would serve it up, basically to say, hey, this is what your drug portfolio will look like from a Humana perspective. Here's what your costs are going to look like, and that type of thing. So as members are basically moving from traditional Medicare to Medicare Advantage, they know exactly, what it's going to look like, so no surprises. So the primary use cases for that was basically, understanding what's it look like in Medicare Advantage. And as you can see, we've got about 51,000 folks that registered, granted permission for us to get their Blue Button data, and that we were able to use in these apps that you see on the right side over there. Some plan recommenders based upon data, formulary like I talked about. I think there was also maybe some directory information as well. So anyway, so that's been in production since 2018. If we could go to the next slide, please. Let's talk about, what's happening from the CMS rule, which, goes into effect on 1/1. It's not enforced until 7/1, of course, but how we're approaching this. So again, we've been going down the path of FHIR for a while, and for the most part, we've got most of the APIs enabled for, the go live in early January. And this is kind of the model that we're taking, is that FHIR.humana.com, or our FHIR server, serves a variety of purposes. Certainly, the third-party apps, they're going to be used for the API, but also our internal apps as well. So before we're releasing it to the general public, we have folks internally that are already using the server for internal clinical information with internal maps. Our internal apps, one called Humana Health. Those are all pinging the same server. They're basically going against, you see some of the resources at the bottom there, and those are all serving information up. One of the things that we did have to refactor, not from an API level per se, but from a data liberation and data democratization perspective, the 1/1/2016 required us to go back and liberate a little bit more data than we had initially done. So we're finishing up that at this point. And also the guidance that we got from CMS I guess 3 weeks ago at the WEDI conference, that as far as data that came in via PDFs or other non-structured documents, we need to be able to, we don't necessarily need to convert those, but other types of documents where you can do a 1-for-1 match, and from a discrete data perspective, we're currently finishing up that work as well. So again, using a standard platform, you're going to hear it the 4th time I said it, platform to meet the requirements of CMS and our internal apps as well, and others going forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so with this being said, I'm going to get ready to kick over to Sonia, but I'm going to draw a little parallel. We talked about, the DTR app, the document template and rules, and yes, I've got a smile on my face, and how we relate that to something we've been doing at Humana for a long time, because the concept of authorizations as it relates to questionnaires is not new. So we developed an implementation, I guess in 2016, which it's not a smart app, it's not a DTR app, but it's an app that runs in the availability space that allows us to do similar functionality. And from a DTR perspective, we've been able to reuse all of that underlying back-end work and put a nice smart app on top of it. So Sonia, can you walk us through that work?
Sure, thanks, Patrick. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is an example of what Patrick mentioned before of Humana's prior authorization questionnaire on availability that we built back in December of 2016. Since then, I think there were 5 questionnaires available at that time, and that's grown to over 230 for both commercial and Medicare membership. And so with this underlying infrastructure in place, the Rapid FHIR team has built a prototype, which is now production ready as of December. Next slide, please. We'll show what that looks like. Yep, so here's an example of the Humana Da Vinci DTR app. This is a Smart on FHIR app that we have on top of that existing Humana infrastructure. A key difference here between what was done with availability is this Smart on FHIR app will launch from within the EHR. So this allows that continuum, and it also aligns with our goals to keep providers in their existing workflows.
Great, thank you, Sonia.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and go to the next slide here. So we're getting ready to go into the grand finale, so to speak. So we're going to talk through it. As those of you that have heard us talk before, we were focused on prior authorization. It is a big deal for Humana. So we've got folks including Lisa and Todd. Lisa is our enterprise senior vice president, including clinical operations, which focuses on prior authorization. So this is near and dear to her heart, I assure you. And so what I'd like to do is throw it over to Lisa. She can talk about how Humana approaches prior authorization, some of the things that we're doing to help reduce burden, and your thoughts on how Da Vinci helps move forward.
Sure, thanks, Patrick. So you started out your presentation early on talking about simple and easy experiences. I think all of us on the phone would agree that prior authorization utilization management is not simple and it's not easy. As this slide articulates, you've got providers on one side, payers on another side, oftentimes competing priorities, and sometimes that leaves the member in the middle. However, we do recognize that prior authorization is an important part of the healthcare system. When done well, it prevents unnecessary care, reduces cost, and improves quality. But there's a big but. It causes a lot of administrative burden. It's not a great experience for any stakeholder that's involved in the process. And so we recognize that we've got to improve that as an organization. And so, as Patrick said, I'm leading an enterprise effort that really we are focused on how do we get really good at prior authorization. Sonia, the example that she just gave around the questionnaires is one example of that. Interoperability is key to all of this and the work that's been done by Da Vinci. We've got to have that in place, and it is so important. It's interesting, earlier today or at some point today, our CEO, Bruce Broussard, issued an op-ed related to interoperability and essentially is saying this is an untapped tool within the industry, within our country, and gosh, wouldn't it benefit us as we're going through this COVID pandemic? Brian, or I think it was Jeff, you also talked about value. And so when we think about interoperability and the use cases, improving prior authorization is one of those best examples. And if we can simplify that, that's really going to increase the value for our members, our providers, and all of the teammates at Humana that are working through that process. So would like to turn it over to Todd now, and Todd's going to walk us through exactly what our use case is for prior authorization and how interoperability is really going to drive that value for the organization. Todd?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. You can go to the next slide. This is I would say, oversimplification of the previous slide that Lisa mentioned, but we do well in many different areas, and one of them is pushing adoption of electronic auth submissions, getting to real-time auth decisions. But as you kind of move your way down the workflow is where there's a lot of opportunity, and where we think, Da Vinci and, the ultimate kind of coverage burden reduction use cases can unlock a lot of value and bring to bear some of the challenges that Lisa was just sharing on the prior slide. So today, we get auth through multiple different channels, sometimes faxes, sometimes through, an IVR, and, largely through clearinghouses like Availity. And, today there's no simplicity in even understanding if an auth is required. So at its most basic sense, we have people in the hospital, we have people at Humana, all managing things that aren't even necessary. So when you think about at its most basic form, pushing visibility and awareness upstream is largely valuable. Then once we get it, we ultimately either don't need it and spend a lot of time trying to clean it up and notify the provider, or if it is, we don't get everything we need, and that starts, what we know is not an optimal process of, faxing and phoning medical records back and forth to ultimately make a decision that's best for the member. So if you go to the next slide, what I get excited about is things that are agnostic and scalable, especially when it's external facing. At Humana, we like any large company, you try to customize or create a solution, but when you take a step back and you think about the provider or the hospital system, they're dealing with multiple different payers and having to navigate through everybody's different processes and ways of doing things. So what I love about Da Vinci is it eliminates that, gets towards standardization, and turns tech solutions into problem solvers. So we love all three of the primary use cases. So like I said, being able to push upstream is an auth even required with minimal data necessary in the provider's workflow. We already talked about the questionnaires, but same thing, we've made a lot of progress with Availity, but that's still not native to, the provider office's workflow. And so if you can embed that within the EHR and let them answer questions about the member situation and health status, we can make quick decisions based off of that. And then lastly is closing that loop. So allowing the auth to be submitted and then making the real-time decision all within the workflow and easing all those friction points that we talked about. And to be honest, the technology is there. It really just requires everybody to adopt it in a way that is repeatable and standardized. And for us, that's a bet we want to make. We obviously want partners on the other side with all of our different technology groups across the EHRs and clearinghouses to join that, because the power for us isn't a Humana specific value. This is just a value to healthcare that in the end, removes a lot of those member friction points. So if you go to the next slide, this is another simplified view, but we've made a lot of that progress with Availity and other solutions to be able to tee up through technology means the three use cases we talked about. But the simplicity of doing it within EHRs and in a provider's workflow is what's ultimately important to us. And we've set what we think is a good foundation in place at Humana, and really are excited about what 2021 is going to bring as we have both sides, connect, provider groups get on board, and start seeing some measurable value across, provider satisfaction, quicker decisions on authorizations, improved access to care, and ultimately, less administrative burden on everybody's part. So I'm clearly excited about this. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in it, and know that this is something that for us is just table stakes to progressing the experience within prior auth.
Great, thank you, Todd. I'd like to call for a moment of silence, but we've got a tight time schedule, so we're going to have to go forward here. But thank you both. That was a great overview of prior authorization. So we focused on some of the big use cases here, specifically prior auth. We'll note that the DTR app that Sonia talked about that goes into production in December will also roll out, for as the coverage requirements discovery and the other submission happens as well. So so great progress there. But I don't want to ignore other things that we have in our pipe. So I'm going to quickly go through these and talk about how they align to the organization. So the Da Vinci risk-based contract member attribution, that is something again that's near and dear to our heart. We're planning to deliver that in Q4 or Q1 of next year. There may be some folks on the call that are probably are going to be our partners in that over the next couple of months. So that's exciting there. From a PDEX perspective, I mentioned this one really early on. We're currently in implementation for that and doing some testing with one of our partners. That has been really interesting because, as I mentioned, I think previously, we have an existing application or existing implementation called the Humana Member Summary, which in many ways was an early version of PDEX before there was PDEX. And we also have many consumers of that. So the ability to make sure that we're serving up PDEX or serving up the information and converting it from basically a proprietary Humana format to an industry standard format has been a little bit challenging. And then also the CDEX implementation, which aligns to our clinical document retrieval for specific purposes, be it chart chase or whatever the case may be. Currently in development, planning for a delivery next year. The DEQM, Data Exchange for Quality Measures. And admittedly, Humana has been mostly focused on making our information available, but we're now starting to harvest and to evolve use cases such as DEQM, and there's some others with virtual care that allow us to receive information that is needed for our internal operations, and also PCDE, payer coverage decision exchange, which again is going to help the industry get through the 1/1/2022 implementation from a payer to payer perspective. So again, I don't want to sell these short. These are all in development as well, but given limited time today, we couldn't go into detail. If you could go to the next slide, please. Also quickly, because I'm gonna round out here and talk about, we've talked about a lot of the use cases that are based upon Da Vinci standards and other standards as well. But FHIR in general provides solutions. So over the last couple of years, we've implemented a couple of things that were either early versions of the Da Vinci use cases, which maybe had not been validated, or even one use case that was not part of Da Vinci and it was very specific to a need for Humana, right? So the first one is what we call the medication profile, which is similar to a PDEX implementation in that a CDS hook comes in, and in this case, we return basically a curated medication list, a list in which our pharmacists have talked to our members. We've also got all their claims information. So as opposed to our clinicians when they're going into the home trying to guess at what the medication list is, which typically took, I think, about 20 minutes out of maybe an hour and 15-minute session, they have a high fidelity, curated medication list in FHIR format right directly there in the workflow. That one actually did win a CIO 100 award last year. Last year. So we're almost to 2021 at this point. So that was a really good implementation. We've impacted about 830,000 member lives with that specific one. The member task profile was another one in which we used FHIR to basically allow hospitalists to communicate with our platform to determine, as our Medicare members are starting to leave the hospital, is there any tasks that we need the physician to do to ensure that our members, as they're leaving, have adequate care and have a path back to the PCP so that there's no issues with care falling off post-discharge. That's impacted about 182,000 members. And also virtual care, which, and Lisa noted this a second ago with, Bruce's, our CEO's note this morning. Virtual care, we've all implemented that, right? In the sense that with COVID-19, the inability of folks to get to their physicians in a safe and economical manner has basically resulted in an explosion of virtual care. So our ability to receive virtual care visits in FHIR format is something that we are eagerly pursuing, and will be in production with that probably next month or early 2001 as basically the ecosystems adopts virtual care as a primary platform. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to go through the rest of these really quickly so we can have time for question and answer. And this slide is one that I've had in my deck, and Alex reminded me of this earlier this morning, probably for 2 years. But what I like to do is, as I go into some of the technology, is if you focus on the green bar on the left side, right, and you see across the ecosystem that this green bar, which is basically FHIR, allows connectivity between all of these entities, devices, which we're starting to test, starting to use, providers, payers, government agencies, population health, CDC, hospitals, whatever. You name your favorite actor, FHIR is going to connect those. And then again, we have use cases on the right side and some other links as well. But if you go to the next slide, let's talk about the Humana specific implementation, because I've talked about platforms. This is my 5th time mentioning it today. So if we could go to the next slide, Alex. There we go. You see a green bar on the Humana implementation as well. And this is the interoperability platform that each of us has alluded to in one way, shape, or form over the last 45 minutes, as a sense that this is our platform, not an application, but a platform that has many capabilities. It certainly supports FHIR, but it also does identity management, manages consent, pub sub. For those technical folks on the phone, it runs stream sets, it runs Kafka, it caches data using document databases, it has pipelining, API management, and API marketplace. There was one question in the chat there. How do you get access to Humana's APIs? It's through a marketplace. So this is kind of our hub, similar to the green bar you saw in the other picture, which enables us to democratize and liberate the data in our operating platforms, right? Because many of these are seasoned systems that have been around for a while, like claims adjudication and other things that we need to make sure that we can provide in a format to enable any experience channel that we have now or in the future, right? So it's not specific to consumers. It's not specific to a provider workflow. It's not specific to a data scientist. The goal is to have a platform that can serve the information up in the standard formats so that we enable the consumer journey that Jeff talked about. We enable in-workflow integration that Lisa and Todd and Sonia walked through, and also other engaged partners, and quite honestly, use cases that we don't have yet, right? They could be Da Vinci use cases a year out from now, things that we need to be able to support. So this is what when we talk about hyper-connectedness in a platform model, this is exactly what we're talking about from a very simplistic perspective. Next slide, please. All right, so for all the technical people out there, I know you can't, you probably want a little more information. So we talked about some of the technical capabilities on the previous slide, but also some of the things that will change the dynamic of how we interact with our providers and our members in the future, including the ability to do event management, complex event management, so that we can tie multiple things together across the organization to be able to proactively communicate with our members and providers, right? Without them asking for us telling them, hey, we see this, right? Maybe this medication is not appropriate, or maybe this gap in care should be addressed. Knowledge graphing, data persistence and optimization, things that exist as part of a platform to enable all of the conversation and all the great things that we've talked about today. Next slide, please. And here's just one example of this. You've all experienced COVID-19 and we're still experiencing, right? But many of us, including Humana, had to react quickly when, as healthcare organizations, we saw the ability to share information for analytics or demand and capacity management came to being very, very quickly. So having the platform and having an agile mechanism allowed us to do a couple of things. So as I talked about the reusability of a platform, we're able to put those things into play pretty quickly. So implementations that historically would have taken a couple of months were done in 3 days, right? The ability for us to get on, basically connect to other entities, including clearinghouses and agencies and those types of things, and make sure that we're providing the right information for COVID-19 across the board, including voice analytics and stuff like that. So as of this morning, the platform has processed 50 million transactions as it relates to COVID-19. Those could be, I don't want to get into the details of what those underlying transactions are, but the ability for a platform based upon interoperability standards to be able to share that information is something that demonstrates the power of standards, and it demonstrates the power of a platform, product, and agile mindset. Next slide, please. And I'm channeling Alex and Jocelyn. They know that we're coming up on time. So just a couple of quick things. What's coming up, right? From an industry perspective, we've talked about a lot of stuff, and this is getting a little bit more technical. But given the fact that we have several connectathons coming up, we talked about Rapid Fire, and this is an overall view of the capabilities that the FAST initiative in partnership with Da Vinci is going to be, basically moving forward with. Da Vinci focusing on the functional use cases, and the FAST initiative, or the Fire at Scale Task Force, focusing on core capabilities. And we're going to start bringing those together so that the functional use cases can benefit from these capabilities at scale. The first is the ability to exchange data across intermediaries with high fidelity. So in our 2021 testing that we'll do as an industry, we will be testing that using special headers in the top of the transaction to enable that to happen. And we will also be testing directory services so that those of us that need to be able to connect to others, and by the way, it's not just us, it's everybody on the call here, in case you missed that, in a dynamic manner. So when a member clicks share my information, that doesn't require that lawyers get in a room and agree on how to share information. It doesn't mean that you call your buddy in the IT shop at the other organization, figure out what his API looks like. It means that you basically connect right there on the spot. So the ability to dynamically figure out how to connect, from one payer to another, or one payer to another app, or whatever the case may be, is going to be part of the directory services. So again, testing that in early 2021 as well. Next slide, please. All right, I think this is going to be it. I don't see a lot of questions coming in as of yet, but maybe Jocelyn and Alex are brokering those for us. So just a couple of key learnings. Enterprise coordination, Jeff talked about this. That was a key thing for us. Data required the most focus and effort, right? So we've been on the FHIR journey. The APIs are not that difficult actually, but mapping, payer data into APIs is something that has probably taken longer than we expected. From a FHIR technology perspective, the facade versus FHIR repository is something that we run both. We actually have a FHIR repository. We also use a facade model for some of our other data. The fact that, I've done this at least 20 times, consumer mediation is a key paradigm shift, right? It's not like the way that we used to share information with long negotiations and that type of thing. Don't overlook federal and state privacy laws. So in your zeal to implement FHIR, make sure that you're not forgetting that we all work under very strict guidelines. Plan for operational readiness, again, in your zeal to bring these APIs to life. Make sure that you can support those from a readiness perspective. We didn't invite our readiness guy to the meeting. That wasn't intentional, maybe a little bit intentional, but don't forget that part of it. And again, don't forget to recognize the value. So the value of APIs, don't underestimate it, folks. It changes the way you do business. All right, with that being said, I think we have come to the end of our presentation, and Jocelyn, Alex?
We have come to the end of the presentation. This has been so exciting. Having seen a similar presentation with the prior authorization focus for the intersection of clinical and administrative data. It's just fantastic to see how far and how fast Humana is really taking their work with FHIR. I do believe one of your teammates, Mike Funk, who sits on our Da Vinci steering committee, has joined us, and just wanted to welcome him and see if he might want to say a word before I lob you a few questions, Patrick, for you and your team to address.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Good. Again, I want to acknowledge this great group of folks, Patrick, Lisa, Todd, Jeff, Sonia, Brian, for the great work that they've talked about here today. But I also, as you mentioned, do sit on the steering committee of Da Vinci. And so I have to take my Humana hat off for just a second and talk a little bit about that steering group. And for those who may not be aware, the steering committee is made up of a group of industry leaders, multidisciplinary, representing the payer community, providers, vendors, including CMS. And, our job is really about setting the strategy, working closely with the operating committee, of which Patrick is a member of, and then making sure and overseeing the execution of that strategy. But it's also about evangelizing, as I think Jocelyn mentioned earlier, about the great work that's going on with Da Vinci to really promote interoperability across the industry. And I've been in healthcare for 40 years, and we've been talking interoperability for a number of those years. I'd like to think I'm a patient person, but I always ask, how long is this going to take? And I never seem to get an exact answer on that. But I think the reality now is it's happening. And I think the work that's been talked about here, other conversations that have taken place clearly indicate that it is happening. I think I've come to the realization, it's not going to happen overnight with the swipe of a pen and we're going to have full interoperability, but we are working towards that. But I think the best thing that we can do as a group is really take it upon ourselves to evangelize, to tell the stories, to talk about, to talk amongst providers and have providers talk amongst providers about the work that's going on here at Humana or any of the other work that's been discussed, or individual work that you have going on, such that we can really get the word out there and we can get people engaged. One of the things that I've been concerned about as a steering committee member has been, we're doing great work around, writing of the implementation guides and the use cases, but, when are we going to get the uptick in really taking these use cases, applying them, and really getting some synergy across the industry around that movement towards full interoperability? So again, great presentation to the team, but I would challenge everybody to think about, how we can build that synergy and really get this movement afoot. So thank you, Alex.
You're welcome, Mike. It's really important for us to do just that. Let's make all of this investment real to get to the outcomes that we want, which is less friction in the system and better experience for all of us as patients. So I want to lob a few questions over to you, Patrick. We've gotten a handful of them that have come in. We'll take our remaining time to address some of those. The first one that came in was from one of our friends at UC Davis, who would be interested in the interoperability model for federated data with unknown business partners and a single patient. This model works when all the payers and the patients are known. How would it work when one or more of the players is unknown? Now, this was asked right after you started.
Yeah, so it's quite a question. I'm going to try to break it down. So the information that we provided today, let's talk about everything except payer to payer, which is in 1/1/2022. So the implementation that we've talked about with the services and the democratization and liberation from a Humana perspective addresses only the information that Humana has either collected or generated on behalf of the member. So if there is an unknown provider, somebody that we don't have visibility to, this model doesn't solve that, right? So it doesn't go to the level of a record locator service across the US to try to find information that we don't have, that we don't know exists or not. It's only the information that we have basically a link to or have maintained if you're talking in CMS parlance. The goal over time is to get to more of that. So the payer-to-payer exchange, which comes in 1/1/22, in which payers have to share information, starts adding to the aggregation of information for that purpose, and also potentially record locator implementations in the future. Could be part of that as well. But the ability to discover information or put information to this process that we don't have a hard association with is not solved in the near term with this model. I'm not sure. Hopefully that answers the question. The goal is to get there. Yeah, okay.
All right. So the next question I wanted to offer was, the interoperability is built on strong API foundation and practices. Can you describe your API productization strategy and how you did implement at Humana? Any outside help in standing up your API framework and governance needed in place, perhaps? Can you go into this a little bit more on how you implemented it at Humana? And this may have come in before you got into some of your substantive slides later on, because it was just about 5 or 10 minutes into your presentation. But they're looking to know that what does your factory look like in building APIs quickly and securely using FHIR?
Yeah, so great question. And I know we've got 2 minutes, I'll quickly address it. And we didn't get into that level of technology, but in the green bar that I showed on the technology slide, there is a layer in that is basically our core data fabric. And the core data fabric has microservices from across the enterprise. So it basically is the mechanism for the enterprise to make data available either in a request response model. In some parts, it's a publication model, but it is basically microservice layer. Then above that, we have a FHIR layer, which uses those underlying microservices at one layer above it to serve up the standard representation of standards-based interoperability. So those internal to the organization can use the underlying microservices if it doesn't need to be standards-based. And for folks that interact with this externally, it is standards-based, because the microservices are orchestrated into FHIR-based resources. I know that was a really, really quick example and probably didn't get into everything that you're looking at there. I think maybe was it, not sure if it was, not sure you answered the question or asked the question, but from a high level, that's how we approach it.
Well, would you suggest anything like participating in upcoming Connect-a-thon to further help build out one's thoughts around that as an opportunity, or other forums where they could get a little bit more details on that maturing of their API infrastructure?
Yeah, so if you're looking for maturing of the API infrastructure, a conversation at Connect-a-thons, probably not as one of the tracks, but a coffee conversation could be something we could look at. Or if you want to ping me, via email or something, I can provide a little bit more guidance, since I think we're pretty close on time today. So good question.
Well, thank you. Yes, thank you, Patrick. We are really close on time because there was such great content today. I'm glad we recorded so others can benefit from this. I'm most appreciative of all the work Humana put into this, but I really want to turn it over to Jocelyn to close out today's session.
Awesome, thanks so much. So first, thank you to everybody that presented. I'd like to do a special shout out for Alex. We literally came up with this concept and idea of creating these community roundtables, in a brainstorming session last November. And I think what we've been able to do and to put forward for content with cooperation from all of our contributing members and their partners over the last 8 months has been insanely better than what we possibly could have anticipated. And I think that closing out with the Humana team and Patrick, you not only coming and presenting like usual for us, but bringing a number of your teammates to show how aligned you are. It's really a great capstone for us. And we've been laughing and joking in text streams about we just need to package you guys up and literally have you do a visit of all the provider and payer organizations in the country between now and the end of the year, so we can get people evangelized, because you're doing great work. A couple shout outs. As Alex mentioned, this is our last roundtable. We hold both member forums and roundtables every single month, the third Wednesday and the fourth Wednesday. So if you are interested in coming participating, reach out to myself and Alex, and we will find you a time slot. And then in addition, if you are a Da Vinci member and you have not done your survey yet this year, please reach out to us as well, because we'd love to talk to you before the year wraps up. And thank you to everyone for making this a reality. This is the fun stuff. And if we don't get to connect between now and the end of the year, happy holidays to everybody, and take care and be safe.
Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone.